My name is Deb Wallace, and we're delighted to have you here joining us at this Books at Baker. I see lots of familiar names in the sign-up log, but lots of new names too. So we're delighted to welcome so many new people to this, what I hope is just your first Books at Baker, and that you'll keep joining us. But before I turn it over to Ashley, what I'd like to do is just give you a little idea of how the session is going to unfold. We're going to take about 25, 30 minutes, and Ashley's going to talk about her work, and then we'll open it up to questions. But actually, the chat will be live, and what we'd ask you to do is just put your questions in at any point, and we'll be culling through those as we go. And Ashley may ask you to put in some comments in the chat as well. So please use that chat function. And because this is all about time, we're going to wrap up right on time at 4:30 after the questions and answer section. But it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Ashley Whillans, who's an assistant professor here at HBS in the Negotiations, Organization, and Markets Unit. And she's teaching a new course in the second year called around Motivations and Incentives, really tied to her work that we're going to hear about today. Because she studies how people navigate trade-offs between time and money, and her ongoing research investigates whether and how these intangible incentives, such as experiential and time-saving rewards, affect employee motivation. She's both in 2015 and 18, she was named a Rising Star of Behavioral Science by the International Behavioral Exchange and the Behavioral Science and Policy Association. She's also part of the Global Happiness Council. I think you're probably hearing a theme here, and the Workplace and Well-Being Initiative at Harvard. Her research has been published in numerous academic journals and popular media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, The Atlantic. And on a personal note, Ashley has been an incredible partner with Baker Library, helping us think about innovative ways to disseminate faculty's research using social media, using different kinds of story types. So our working knowledge publication, which I hope you will all sign up for if you haven't so far, is much better because of Ashley's input. And I think she might be, well, one of two faculty I know who have an IMDb profile. The other is Dean Noria. Ashley attended the London Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and little known to me, I love being a librarian because you have to research to do these, is that one of her film critics is in one of my favorite movies with Ellen Page, Juno. So now I have to go back and get that moment, see where I can see you in there. So please join me in welcoming Ashley to our Books at Baker. We look forward to your presentation, and then I'll circle back when we start the Q&A. Ashley.
Great, thanks so much. And maybe Deb, you can give me a heads up that you can see my slides and everything looks good on your end?
Yeah, I can see them. Perfect.
Okay, great. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I'll try to keep my remarks relatively brief so we can get into some meaningful discussion about time smart and what that means to all of you, and how we might be thinking about applying some of the principles that I talk about in the book in our own personal lives. Before I delve into the vast amount of research and strategies and tips that I want to share with all of you today, I often get asked why I wrote this book, and this was something that really came out of a personal need or experience that I was going through as a tenure track faculty at HBS. In my first year on the tenure track, I had just written a whole dissertation on the importance of prioritizing time over money in our personal life for our happiness, our social relationships, our physical health. And yet I felt in my own life I was struggling to put social relationships first. I remember this one moment where I was giving an academic talk and had on the board that people who value time over money are happier in their social relationships, and yet a romantic relationship of mine of 10 years was in shambles, in no due part to my prioritization over the last several years of work as opposed to family. And so I really embarked on this journey of writing this book to put what I was learning about in my academic research into practice in my own personal life, and to bridge science and practice together to try to help all of us both understand why we feel time poor, but also to enable all of us, myself included, to enact small, simple strategies in our everyday lives to reclaim our time and hopefully live a happier life. So as a happiness researcher, I have a PhD in studying happiness and well-being. And I think why I became so interested in this topic is because in undergrad, I found it so inspiring to hear people like Ed Diener, who's a prominent psychology professor, talk about the fact that our happiness was under our own control. So he says probably the biggest insight is that happiness is not just a place, but also a process. Happiness is an ongoing process of fresh challenges, and it takes a right attitude and activities to continue to be happy. So what this means is that a lot of our happiness and our time affluence is under our own personal control, so long as we take intentional, deliberate steps to have more and better time and more happiness in our everyday lives. And that's really what this book seeks to do, is to help all of us spend our moments differently, knowing that the way that we spend our minutes become hours, our hours become weeks and months, and how we spend today starts to accumulate to how we spend our entire lives. So in the chat window, I want everyone to write down a few things that they think about when they think about time. What feelings and behaviors come to mind? Now that we've all thought a little bit about what time means to us, oh, I see there's a lot, lots of engagement. That some of us are saying things like procrastination or being squeezed, being stressed, and some of us are talking about time being precious and valuable and reflecting on positive experiences and moments. That's great, thank you. Now, time means so many things to all of us, and many of us feel overwhelmed by the demands of work and life. So if you're feeling a little bit more like this quadrant here, where you're feeling overwhelmed by the demands of work and life, or like I shared at the beginning of this talk, feeling like you're constantly making sacrifices of your personal life to focus on work or productivity, you're not alone. Over 80% of working Americans in the studies that I've conducted report feeling so overwhelmed by the demands of work and life that they start to feel like they don't have everything under their own control. And these feelings of time poverty can have stronger negative effects on happiness than being unemployed. So we all want to think about how we can move the needle from feeling overwhelmed to allowing more time to spend with our friends, our family, volunteering, and on hobbies that we find meaningful. So I talk about several strategies in the book, which I'll share at a high level, and then we can engage in a conversation about together later on in this discussion. So these strategies, time first mindset, finding time, funding time, and reframing time, really came out of a large set of studies that I've been conducting over the last several years. And the first I'm going to talk about is this idea that putting time first and valuing our time more than productivity and more than money is associated with greater happiness and greater satisfaction. Before I talk a little bit about this first strategy, I want to share a little bit about why I think time is so important and kind of share some of the academic findings that led me to pursue this topic. So we know from a great deal of research that wealth only weakly predicts happiness. And when I'm talking about happiness, I'm talking about two critical components: the overall cognitive evaluation of our life, so the extent to which we reflect on our life and think that we're doing pretty well, as well as the extent to which we experience satisfaction, joy, and don't experience very much stress on an everyday basis. And research suggests that after a certain point, the amount of money we have no longer predicts the amount that we laugh or smile on an everyday basis. So we can summarize this literature as suggesting that the amount of money we have can protect against sadness and stress when our car breaks down. Money provides a solution to that problem. However, it doesn't necessarily provide us with greater joy. And this is where time comes in. Time affluence, this feeling of having control and feeling like you have enough time on an everyday basis, can promote happiness and is associated both with this overall cognitive evaluation of how well we're doing in life, but also the extent to which we experience satisfaction and lower stress on an everyday basis. However, these feelings of time poverty are associated with misery, sometimes to the same extent as being unemployed. And these feelings of time poverty come from two critical components, or a couple of time traps that I talk about. There are many, and here are a couple. The first time trap that I talk about, and that has been well documented, is our constant connection to technology. This is known as the autonomy paradox. Our constant connection to technology was supposed to free us from our offices. Instead, now we take our offices everywhere we go. And our constant connection to technology creates what I and other researchers call time confetti. So it distracts and disrupts our leisure into small bite-sized units of time that are easily squandered and lost. These constant disruptions during our leisure and during our work create time poverty, or this feeling of being overwhelmed and having too many things to do and not enough time to do them, via this sense of goal conflict. When we're in our leisure activities, our technology pulls us out of the moment and into our to-do list and all of the things that we have to do or should do or want to do at work. When we're at work, our technology might pull us out of the moment and remind us that we're focused on work as opposed to other meaningful goals in our lives. So not only does this disruption create stress, it also creates goal conflict, which is one of the major drivers of this feeling of being time poor. There are also ideal worker norms which have happened in organizations worldwide, given that metrics, observable outcomes, and objective performance metrics are less used in organizations to drive performance. So we're more likely to use subjective performance evaluations. And at the end of the day, many of our organizations are starting to use responsivity or hours worked as a proxy for commitment and success. So this creates these always on cultures which create burnout and stress and make all of us feel time poor, such that even if we're engaging in leisure, we feel like we should be working or checking our phone or keeping up on our inbox. So now that we've talked a little bit about a couple of the time traps that can make all of us feel time poor, I want to share some of the research that I've conducted showing some simple strategies that we can all take in our everyday lives to feel more time affluent. The first strategy is really about our mindset, the extent to which we focus and prioritize time in our everyday life. So it's really about how we think about this fundamental resource, which does predict what we do, but in the absence of changing our behavior, even changing our mindset can powerfully predict our happiness. In large-scale data sets with workers all over the world, I've asked one really simple question: do you value time or do you value money? And because this is a sensitive topic, I really asked my participants, who are you more like? Are you more like Tina, or are you more like Maggie? I gender balance, this is just an example. Tina values her time more than her money. She's willing to sacrifice her money to have more time. Maggie values her money more than her time. She's willing to sacrifice her time to have more money. And what I find across all of my studies, regardless of, across all of my studies, is that people have a slight preference to value time over money. Individuals who tend to be older also tend to value time over money. And this is related to a great deal of research in social psychology on the social selectivity theory, which suggests as we get older, we start to pursue activities that are more focused on meaning, less focused on novel information seeking, and are a little bit less focused on work, but really around these higher order motivations that we might have. Unsurprisingly, people who make more money are more time focused, but not by much. And really what drives those demographic differences are the fact that people who tend to have more money also feel more financially secure. So it isn't so much as getting to a certain point in our lives where we feel like we can be time focused, but really about this certainty of feeling like you have enough money, of feeling confident about your financial future that drives whether people are more money focused or more time focused. I also see that people with a time-first mindset are more likely to spend fewer hours a week working and spend more time volunteering. They're more civically engaged. They're more likely to write a letter to a politician talking about things that they feel passionate about or strongly about. So they're more civically oriented. They also are more likely to engage in social connection. Now, we know from a great deal of research that social connection is a really important factor that both protects us against the stress that we experience in our everyday lives, but also promotes joy. People who have a time-first mindset and value time over money are not only more likely to invest time in social relationships that are already existing, but in our data, they're also more likely to interact with what researchers call weak tie interactions. Gillian Sandstrom and her colleagues have found that these weak tie interactions, these casual conversations, between the barista at the coffee shop that we used to have, or with colleagues that we might now have over text message or Slack or other more instant forms of connection, are really critical drivers of happiness and meaning. And in my studies, people who value time over money are more likely to spend time interacting with those in their social environment, or they're more likely to capitalize on opportunities to engage in even brief social interactions with those around us. And these weak tie interactions are not just good for well-being, they also tend to be the source of creative ideas or work opportunities. So people who are time focused are not just thinking about productivity or getting through the day, the next thing on their to-do list. They're also more open-minded about potential opportunities in their environment. In some of our most recent work, we've also found that this time-focused mindset predicts what kind of careers people choose and the happiness that they experience as a result. We recently tracked over 2,000 graduating seniors over the course of a couple of years. Students who said they valued time more than money chose careers for more intrinsically motivated reasons. So they said that they wanted to do the job because it was something they felt truly passionate about versus they had to do the job. And this is something that produced meaningful increases in happiness. So regardless of baseline levels of happiness, actually increased their happiness 2 to 3 years after graduation, simply focusing on time and then choosing more intrinsically motivated careers as a result. So despite all of this research suggesting that living a time-focused life is good for happiness, good for social relationships, good for physical health, it's okay to be money-focused. I talk about this in the book, but I think, I already admitted to you at the beginning of the talk that this is a trade-off that I struggled with in my own life, and being a few years out of graduate school, I'm still focused more on work and productivity as opposed to having more and better time. And that's totally okay. The purpose of trying to understand whether you're more of a Tina or more of a Morgan is really just trying to understand what's your default setting. Where do you start off as? Are you more inclined to choose leisure over work, or more inclined to work as opposed to leisure? If you're more inclined to engage in work or activities along those lines, then you want to be thinking about how you might be able to find time in other areas of your life. So this is where the other strategies that my research has come this is where the other areas of my research really speak to. So the first strategy I want to talk about is finding time. And it is the idea of being deliberate and mindful with the way that we spend time on an everyday basis. It is easy to be mindless about the way that we spend time on an everyday basis. Research suggests that we don't become sensitive to small losses of time until they become big ones. We don't become sensitive to losses of time until we're talking about 10 or 12-month project deadlines. With money, we're very sensitive to small losses, but with time, we waste time and it often goes unnoticed. So one strategy of combating this time poverty that we all experience is this idea of finding time. So you can think about trying to maximize what labor economists call your U index, which is you want to spend more time engaged in positive activities and less time engaged in negative activities. But you don't always just want to be pursuing what some philosophers call hedonic happiness, just going after the most positive experiences. You also want to be filling your life with more meaningful or purposeful activities. And sometimes those are activities that are not necessarily so positive in the moment. If you're training for a marathon, not every run feels great. When you have young kids at home, not every moment is a source of pure momentary bliss. However, it's a source of meaning in your life. So you want to be thinking about maximizing the amount of time that you spend in productive or meaningful activities and minimizing the amount of time that you spend in unproductive and stressful activities. So that's this bottom left quadrant here. So you can think about looking at your last work day and complete this grid. What activities did you do in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening? And where would you put these activities on this grid? Where you engage in active leisure, like exercising or socializing in the beginning of the day, which might have been productive and enjoyable, so that would be in the top right quadrant, where you engage in a lot of activities that were stressful and unproductive. Interestingly, when we feel time poor and overwhelmed at work, we're more likely to take on some of these tasks in the bottom left quadrant. We're more likely to take on unproductive and stressful tasks like getting to the bottom of our inbox or filing all of our paperwork. And this is something that psychologists have documented as the near urgency effect. It explains why our inbox goes to 0 when we're under a major project deadline. When we're feeling overwhelmed, we take on small tasks to boost our sense of competence and confidence. And we want to make sure to check in with ourselves and really hold ourselves accountable to not succumbing to the near urgency effect. and really block off periods of time in our day to engage in everything on the top. So productive activities that are meaningful and relaxing. One way that you can actually put this into practice is being proactive and prioritizing the important. So this is the idea that we need to set aside time to work on these important, non-urgent tasks in the context of our everyday life. I talk about this strategy and we've done research on it. We call this the pro time or proactive time activity. Some of you might have heard this in the context of time blocking. The really important component of this is you need to first set aside a little bit of time. So you can see here on Thursday afternoon to plan what you're going to do with your long blocks of free time. In the absence of committing to what you're going to do with the free time available to you, you might squander those blocks of time or schedule over them because you don't know exactly what you were going to do with that block of time that you're giving yourself later in the week. So the first part of this idea is you want to set aside a 30-minute block of time where you plan what you're going to do with the 2 subsequent longer blocks of time. So you can see this individual in our experiment put a 2-hour block of pro time on Friday, Monday, and Tuesday. And this is to work on important but not necessarily urgent tasks. During this time, it's very important that you disconnect from your technology and that you let your teammates know that you're engaging in a block of uninterrupted time so they don't ping you for a task at work or a conversation when you're trying to get your heads down work time done. We've shown that this simple strategy of time blocking can really increase self-reported productivity, and people in the control condition actually got less effective over time. We're asking them about their happiness and their productivity, and they're reporting decreases in satisfaction with their productivity and increases in stress over time. However, in our pro time or proactive time intervention, individuals actually reported greater satisfaction and more productivity, and they wish that this time blocking or time boxing had been implemented across their entire organization. Another way that you can find moments of free time that easily get squandered and lost in the context of your everyday life is a really simple strategy around keeping a time affluence to-do list. So this is when you find yourself with 5-minute, 10-minute, or 30-minute windfalls in between various meetings in your day. When a meeting gets canceled, instead of going to social media or engaging in these mindless habits that all of us have, myself included, keep a list of activities that you could complete in small windfalls of free time that don't necessarily involve social media. This could be texting a friend, working on a small work project on the side that doesn't take much time, or going for a walk around the block. Keeping a time affluence to-do list holds us accountable for making sure we're engaging in more of the activities that we want and less of the activities that are more mindless or habitual activities for us, like social media. And of course, as someone whose research has intersected with time management, of course you want to think about finding more time for yourself by saying no. This is not surprising. So many time researchers talk about this strategy. However, I will say that some research led by HBS PhD Grant Donnelly, one of my collaborators, really suggests how you should go about saying no. So although it can feel really intuitive to say, no, I can't do something because I'm too busy, people pick up on the fact that we all have 24 hours in a day. And if you really wanted to do something, you would actually do it and make time for it. So time signals something that is personally important and sensitive to you. So you don't want to make a time-related excuse. You don't want to say, no, you can't do something because you don't have time, because the other person will think that you just don't want to do whatever it is they're asking. It's much better to provide an energy-related excuse, no excuse, or an excuse that's related to an external attribution, such as a financial constraint or a constraint on your time or resources in other domains. That's more likely to garner a positive interpersonal response from whoever you decline. So don't make a time-related excuse. Now, this is a strategy, funding time, that I spent a lot of time in my dissertation researching, which is the idea that you want to, again, think about buying yourself out of experiences that are unpleasant so you can have more time to engage in time affluent producing activities and happier moments. So in a series of studies that my collaborators, including Mike Norton and Elizabeth Dunn, have run, we ask people whether they spend any money to outsource tasks that they dislike doing. And we find that people who spend money to outsource disliked tasks report greater happiness and less stress, unsurprisingly. However, one pushback I sometimes get is, this sounds like a strategy I can't afford. But we've seen time affluence and happiness benefits with as little as $40. So college students who I've told about this strategy have gone and bought used bikes so that they don't have to walk to work in the morning, or coffee machines that automatically brew their coffee. Just the act of spending $40 in a way that saves time can produce benefits for happiness and can reduce stress. Now, especially right now, a strategy that we're finding is particularly good is funding time is for relationship satisfaction. Mike Norton and Jessica Powell and myself have a whole bunch of data showing that couples who make time-saving purchases together in a typical month with the intention of saving time report greater relationship satisfaction because they're able to spend more quality time with one another. So we want to be thinking about funding time in the context of our romantic relationships in order to maximize the amount of time that we have to spend together. Now, a few caveats with these findings. It's really important that you spend this time or you make these purchases together with your partner. So making a purchase that benefits you, but not necessarily both you and your partner, will not always translate into greater relationship satisfaction. You also don't want to gift your partner with a chore that they wish you did. I saw this play out in my household growing up when my dad used to try to buy, sorry dad if you're listening, my dad used to buy my mom a house cleaning service, and my mom just wished that he would do a little more of the housework. So you don't want to be thinking about buying a house cleaning service if it feels like you're trying to make up for a discrepancy in chores that you and your partner do. But otherwise, if you make the decision together, especially right now when we have more demands on our time due to childcare and school closures, time-saving purchases seem to be paying off for relationship satisfaction even more now than they did before. Another point is that these benefits emerge even for people who are at the lower socioeconomic spectrum, again, suggesting that small amounts of time saving can go a long way when it comes to happiness and reducing stress. And the last strategy I want to talk about is this idea of reframing time. So to get greater time affluence in our lives, we don't need to spend any money at all. We just sometimes need to change the way we're thinking about the activities that we find ourselves doing that are not necessarily positive or pleasurable, don't necessarily give us greater meaning and satisfaction. So this could be thinking about all of the work tasks that so many of us have to do. Administrative burdens have increased across all professions in the last decade. But when you're engaging in paperwork or budgeting, finances, other administrative tasks, my PhD student Jae-Won Yoon and I, along with Grant Donnelly, have some work, and Ed O'Brien, showing that if you simply reframe that task as having a higher level purpose of helping your colleagues get their work done, that you feel more engaged in the task and that task becomes more intrinsically motivating. So you want to be thinking about how you can reframe the tasks that you have to engage in on an everyday basis as a way to help your colleagues or to help your organization fulfill their critical mission. You can also think about reframing time in the way that you think about leisure. So often, and especially in American work culture, we think about leisure as laziness. There's very high Protestant work ethic in society. Whereby we think that any time that's spent idle is almost a moral sin, is really the definition of Protestant work ethic. So we want to be reframing our time to see leisure as something that's productive and restful and an end to itself. We've done some research showing that individuals who engage in more active leisure and less passive leisure, such as engaging in more exercising, volunteering, or engaging in hobbies, report greater overall happiness and perceived control over their life. And we've also found some research, so this was done with millionaires living in the Netherlands, that people who have more money tend to have more control over the way that they spend time at work on an everyday basis. And this relates, of course, to research on job crafting, suggesting that the extent to which we can control key aspects of our job can have critical downstream benefits for happiness and stress. We also see some suggestive evidence, and more research has come out since, that a job autonomy and feeling control over the way we spend time at work can also carry over to how much energy we have to engage in leisure activities that are more active on an everyday basis. So we want to reframe the way that we think about leisure, not as something that's wasteful, but as something that can be productive, meaningful, and inspire greater happiness. And a bonus strategy, and I think what really prompted me to write the book and to include a lot of worksheets and toolkits and kind of reflecting in my own life, is to make time and space to put these strategies into practice in your own life and to reflect on what quality time means to you. I've given some ideas of the kinds of activities that are associated with greater happiness. We know from our own studies that quality time is feeling supported, feeling positive in the moment, and being present. However, what those activities are that facilitate this feeling of having quality time to spend with the people and on the causes you care about will look different for everyone. So I hope that everyone takes a second to reflect on what truly matters and to reflect on the kinds of experiences that enable them to have more quality time. We also want to think about avoiding time traps. This is the idea that, as I mentioned before, we get into this trap that busyness is a status symbol. Try to focus on contributing and adding value to your communities by producing high quality work, not necessarily focusing on quantity or always being available, but really taking ownership of your own time and not succumbing to this idea that busyness confers high status. We also want to protect our time by making sure that we protect our future. We often think that we're going to have more time tomorrow than we do in the present. So we want to overcome this idea of future time slack and try to protect our future time as much as we try to protect our current moment. And finally, I want to end by providing us with a reminder that focusing on time is not selfish. It can be very difficult to focus on time, especially when we're feeling financially uncertain, we're in an economic recession, and there's a lot of stress and strain that all of us are experiencing and that the world around us is experiencing. When I talk sometimes about the importance of focusing on time, people say that's not for right now. I need to be focusing on other things, on being productive. But what my research really says is to be a productive and meaningful, focused member of the societies that we're part of and to really contribute back to the communities that we're part of, we need to be making sure we make time for ourselves to actively rest and reflect, because it's really in making enough time for ourselves that we're able to have the energy and attention to best serve those that we care about. One of my MBA students, Sana Mohammed, sent me this book at the end of class by Cleo Wade, and this quote really stuck out to me along this line of self-compassion. We take care of ourselves by lightening up and not being so hard on ourselves. At times, life seems to be one never-ending to-do list, but we must learn to disrupt the flood of life's demands to replenish our energy so we can fully show up for all of our passions and responsibilities. So with this, I want everyone to take a few seconds now to engage in an implementation intention. This is something to help all of us take our values and live them in our everyday lives. So I want you to write down one element of your life that you will change in the next 24 hours to have more and better time. I also want you to tell one of your colleagues or your partner or family member or friend to hold what it is so that they can hold you accountable to follow through on your time smart intention. I also have been doing some research on the forced experiment we're all in and working from home, but I'll leave that for the Q&A. You can find out more about my research in the book that we're talking about today, and also a related Harvard Business Review article that came out last year called Time for Happiness. And with that, I want to thank all of my collaborators who've helped build this body of research that makes this talk possible and has delved into time affluence and happiness with me over the last several years. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I want to make sure to leave ample time for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. You've given us a ton of things to think about. So while our participants, if you have a question you'd like us to try to coordinate with Ashley, if you'd write it in the chat, we'll start pulling things from there. So if you use the chat for some questions, I'll just ask a couple to get going, and then that way we will start. I noticed there have been a few in so far, but please go ahead and write in the chat. So thanks. And it would help if you make it to all participants or all panelists and attendees, then that way we can all see the questions. Anyway, so I have a question that came to me very early on in reading the book, and I'm wondering, can we learn this? Can we learn from hindsight and taking the time and reflecting? You told the story about Nicole and Thomas, and one makes the decision to go on this fabulous trip. That would be Thomas. And Nicole, for some reason, 5 years later, she can't even remember why she didn't go. Whereas Thomas, who then took his sister with him on this fabulous ski trip, remembers the trip with great gusto and a lot of fond memories of it. So, but Nicole, 5 years later, do you think she recognized that fact and had changed the way she thinks about spending time and making decisions? Are we treatable?
Yeah, we are, but there is an intention action gap and an awareness action gap. And I've talked a little bit around this in the talk. Even in my own life, I was doing all this research. I knew that being more time affluent, more time focused would be likely to promote happiness. Yeah, I wasn't taking any action in my own life to put that belief into practice. So when I was talking to Nicole, she recognized that she had made the wrong decision. I can't say she necessarily had changed her behavior as a result in our conversation, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. I would focus on, and this is why I ended my talk this way, one small, simple change that you can make in the next day. Just start making sure that your actions are aligned with your values and intentions. So very concretely, one thing that I did to try to disrupt my habits around always focusing on work at the expense of social relationships, hobbies, and other aspects of my life. So I disrupted my morning routine. So the very first thing I did in the morning typically was sit down, right to work, and get started on whatever it is the task was in the day. I've since disrupted that habit to remind myself about the importance of other areas of my life. So the first thing I do in the morning is I maybe go for a walk, or I will write down and I'll write a few things that I want to get done that day or read the news, but I don't go straight to my computer. And I think that action helps me remind myself to live intentionally throughout the day. And this is something that's going missing. The commute used to serve this function for many people. And in the virtual work environment, we're finding that breaks and boundaries exist less. So it really is as if we're living at work because we don't have those clear separation between work and home. So it's critical that we all sort of build in a buffer or a commute right now to help with that mental separation between work and home.
And in fact, that leads to another question I had about much of your research and your data collection has been done prior to the pandemic and our remote work and shelter in place lockdown types of orders. Do you think people's responses to your questions, do you think the data will change? How will people respond differently now that we've been in a totally different kind of world?
So this, I have 2 or 3 papers I'm writing exactly on this topic right now, or I've written with my colleagues. We see that people do have this greater recognition of the things that truly matter to them. So they report in our surveys, this is based on data that we have with 30,000 employees from 6 countries worldwide, showing that they've been spending more time with friends and family, and in the future, they want more of that time. They've had more flexibility at work. In future, they want even more of it. In some studies that we've been conducting following a longitudinal panel of graduating college students during this time, which of course is a major life transition, we found that to the extent that individuals themselves are not experiencing financial hardship or dealing with an urgent pressing concern right now, but feel like but are watching it or observing it in the world, they are changing their beliefs around what they want in a career. So they're focused more on meaning as opposed to necessarily an extrinsically motivated career. But it does depend on how much, how serious people have been personally affected by the economic situation currently. But in general, people want more free time and more flex time. And they're not always getting it. They're also reporting feeling that they're engaging in more unproductive work and more passive leisure now than they did before. And so there is work to be done to make work from home more sustainable going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what do you feel about to-do lists? There's a great question in here about what are your suggestions for dealing with never-ending to-do lists? Should we not make those to-do lists, or instead can we make them and just be able to let a lot of stuff go on the list? Or are you like me? I put things on a list so I can cross them off even after I've already done them.
I feel like you need a little bit of both, right? So I talked about the mere urgency effect and how we want to take on more tasks just to get that boost of confidence that happens when we say yes to something. So you can get that. I had a friend in grad school that used to keep a to-do list that was somewhat hilarious, like get up, shower, eat toast. Like it was and I think it helped her get that sense of goal completion. So I would say you want kind of 2 to-do lists. You want the important stuff that's not necessarily urgent, that you know you're going to need to protect time for in your calendar. And then you need to work toward that priority each and every week. So you don't get to the end of the week and wonder why you didn't make any progress on that really important work that is not necessarily the most urgent thing on your to-do list. And then I think maybe keeping a to-do list for all those urgent tasks that are fairly small. So you get that sense of goal completion. You get a sense of being able to cross something off your list at the end of the day.
So another question that we see coming up in various themes here is, is there a difference between the hourly worker and the salaried worker? Is the essential worker / single parent at a deficit for making some of these choices? Or with somebody who has a lot of external constraints on their time and energy? Basically, in other words, does a higher paying job give you more flexibility to do some of these trade-offs?
So it's interesting. We have a recent perspectives paper in Nature Human Behavior trying to unpack some of the impacts of income on time poverty. But what we see in our data is that people who are at the lower end of the income distribution and those at the higher end of the income distribution are both very time poor. Lower income individuals might be struggling to make ends meet. They might wait in long lines to receive various kinds of aid. They might be applying for jobs. They might be single parents. They have a lot of demands on their time that fragments their leisure or makes their leisure feel less valuable or feel like something they shouldn't be taking. So we have data from working mothers in Kenya and India showing that leisure in those contexts can be associated with higher depressive symptomology because it's not seen as a legitimate way to spend one's time. It does have emotional benefit when you legitimize the leisure, but it doesn't feel like you should be spending time on it given the economic constraints. So my research has started to move in this direction of focusing both at an organizational policy level around what are the infrastructure that we can put in place, time-saving aid, to help people at lower ends of the income distribution, as well as those at higher ends of the income distribution. It's interesting because higher income individuals do have more workplace flexibility, but then they also have the constant connection and need to show their proficiency at their jobs by being constantly engaged. They might have more autonomy, but truly a great deal of research suggests that they are more very stressed as well, because that autonomy comes with this cost of always needing to be on in order to make that next promotion in any higher income jobs are up and out. So I would say both lower and higher income jobs, individuals are experiencing time poverty due to a variety of different constraints. And that my strategies really run the gamut from involving significant trade-offs to daily decisions that most of us can make around the margin if we have some discretionary income to spend. And some research that I haven't talked about in this talk, but I'm actively engaging in this program of work right now, is a role of government and nonprofits to help individuals at lower ends of the income distribution not have to wait as long to get the aid that they're entitled to. This is related to some of Cass Sunstein's work, to reduce paperwork and administrative burdens so that we're thinking about other ways that we can remove not only financial constraints, but also temporal constraints that are so evident among employed people who make less money. And then in terms of this point around hourly versus salary, this is sort of like a different set of research findings, which I also have engaged with and find very interesting. People who are paid by the hour tend to know the economic value of their time more than people who are paid by salary. So what that means is they're actually less likely to choose leisure over money. So they actually focus more on economic gain, regardless of their income. They're more likely to do things that are going to produce a financial return. And so if you're paid by the hour, you want to be thinking about taking your leisure off the clock, if you will, so you can really reap the full hedonic benefit of your leisure activity, since your default mindset becomes around billing and focusing on money as opposed to taking your time off the clock and enjoying the free time that you have.
Yeah, yeah. There's another question here about to what extent do you think this is an individual problem that we individually can make great progress addressing, or more like a societal problem? So societal versus individual. The tension reminds me a bit of the difference between Sheryl Sandberg and Gloria Steinem's approach to thinking about women and the workplace.
Yeah, what a great question. So it is both, and I talk about this in the book. I'm a social psychologist, a microorganizational behavior scholar. So I focus on individual level decisions, knowing and under this idea that the decisions we make around the margins can have significant impact on the amount of stress and happiness we experience on an everyday basis. But I'm also careful to say that our institutions, our organizations, our nations, the way that they're set up, make us time for the amount of paid time off we're afforded or not, the amount of paid childcare we're afforded or not, all contribute to how much social support we have available to us and our own individual levels of time poverty, who we're married to, how they feel about time poverty and time saving services. Our workplace organizational structure influences how much of a sense of urgency we're constantly expected to feel and how on we have to be. So there are both individual and more macro level factors that predict the extent to which we experience time affluence or time poverty and the extent to which we put time first. We published a paper last year showing that at a country level, countries who valued leisure more than work, regardless of their GDP, reported greater subjective well-being, had happier citizens, and they were better able to weather the economic recession of 2008. So countries, even if they had low GDP, their citizens didn't experience to the same extent stress and negative emotions as a result of the financial crisis in 2008, in part because we argue that individuals had time to cultivate meaning outside of their workplaces and were less psychologically impacted by work relationships or structures that might have changed during the economic recession. And so this is a jumping point where we start to argue, societies like Sweden and European countries that have 4-day work weeks and have mandated fines if you check email after 5 p.m. Might be better in the long run, or at least producing citizens that are happier and are more able to navigate the demands of work and life. So it's not just up to individuals, it's really up to policymakers, HR leaders and CEOs, managers of companies to start helping all of us help ourselves make time smart choices.
There's the proverbial question. I love this one. What if your boss doesn't get it and focuses on hours instead of results?
Oh, I have so many of my students that email me about this. It's like, why don't we just work to output? Why do we work to hours? I waste time pretending to work so that because if I turn something in too soon, I'm not seen as efficient. I'm seen as somehow subpar and turning in lower quality work. I think this is also where we need some organizational mechanisms to design strategies for teams to have these kinds of conversations. So I've been doing some research with one of my esteemed colleagues, Leslie Perlow, who's done a lot of work at the collective level. And so we're trying to think about how do you start to have these conversations and empower employees to ask for what they need and to have these kinds of conversations with their managers. And I do think, and I have written about and talked about the fact that more broadly managers and leadership sets the tone and sets the norms around what's appropriate behavior regarding time. So when you send that email in the middle of the night, and I've done this myself, send an email while I'm traveling and then my students think it's urgent and then they don't sleep. And I think we often forget that we're modeling behavior to our employees that is either that can be more positive or less positive. So setting norms around email communication that are very clear, setting formal procedures for the ways that employees can ask for more time on adjustable deadlines at work, since so many of us work on deadlines that are not fixed, but are rather something that can be navigated through conversation. Setting up these norms and processes, I think, would go a long way in many organizations to help employees feel more comfortable asking for the time that they need and also having conversations with their teams and managers around time hygiene, if you will, setting clear norms and communication for the way that we, how much we need to be on and when.
Yeah. There's another question that makes me think about the 5 strategies that you put forward. And the question is, it's always a juggle between work and relationships. Depends on what's the priority at the time. So given our constant shifting priorities, I mean, it'd be wonderful to say day 1 and day 27 look exactly the same, but we know that there's that constant movement. Are you the 5 activities or approaches that you suggested, do you see using them at different times, different combinations, different Like how do we be how can we be more flexible in making some of these decisions?
Yeah, so in chapter 4 of the book, I called The Long View, I talk about how we might be able to think about putting these strategies into practice over longer time horizons. So we want to actually be thinking about our career decisions, our personal decisions to have kids or not, our decision of who we're going to, you know, when to get married or if we're going to get married, caregiving responsibilities that we might have, and think about those periods of time as places where we might become more time poor, or we might be both time poor and materially constrained, or focused on our career and time constrained. And then think about how we might be able to set up the structures of our life using some of these strategies to manage all of these competing demands on our time. So very concretely, you know, as you move into a career decision that might involve more hours,
Mm-hmm.
what might your social support look like? Maybe you can have a preemptive conversation with your partner around the demands that you might face at home. Could you go to the market economy for support? How might you talk to your employer about asking for more time on deadlines during that period of time? So I think we can do some longer term planning over major time horizons. And there's some activities and workbooks in that section that are about thinking about planning your life around periods of time where you might have more or less of one of these kinds of resources in order to create balance in your own life via these different via these different strategies that I've talked about or others.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the book for a minute, because you know, we as a librarian, we think about the book as an artifact, and you've made lots of different choices in putting this book together. I'm wondering, you've put such great thought into exercises and checklists and reflections and different tips and approaches. What's the feedback that I know today's literally the first day the book is off the press, but I'm assuming you've given everybody who's helped you through this. What's the reaction to having these more physical things that you do, the checklists, et cetera? Do people find that helpful? Do they put serious time into it? Do they mark up their book? Do they make a photocopy? Or what have you found? How do they interact with your
Yeah, so we've developed these different tools based on some of my own research. So some of the strategies and questions in the book are questions taken out of my own research papers. And I think thinking through all of these decisions and actually engaging with the material, people have actually very interestingly started to respond to me and said, you know, after doing this worksheet and thinking about how time poor, time rich I was, and thinking about my activities on an everyday basis, you're right. I do have more discretionary income than I thought, or discretionary time rather than I thought. I'm richer in time than I thought. Like, I'm more time affluent. I just thought I was time poor because I might not always be as deliberate with my time as I thought before. And so going through the act of writing down your actual time use and how it matches or is mismatched with the way that you would want to spend time on an ideal day, that exercise and reflection has been eye-opening for people in the sense that their time is more in control, or they have more of it available than they thought they might have originally, but that they might just not always be spending their time in the most mindful and intentional ways, given distractions or given other demands or external demands on their time.
Yeah. Well, I hesitate to say I wish we had more time.
That's okay. Time jokes are something that I welcome.
Well, and you've probably seen in the chat, there's been some really interesting time jokes, or this reminds me of a story that are coming through there, and we'll share the chat, because there's been some really interesting things there. You've given us a lot to think about, and if we do each take a moment to write down something that we'll take action on, it would be great if people would write into us and tell us what they did and how that impacted their time. So, or their happiness. So there's just so much to talk about. I can't thank you enough for joining us. But as typical, and I'm sure you found in writing the book, when just reading your acknowledgements, the number of people that you thanked, it also takes a whole village for us to put on one of these sessions. And I'd like to thank Madeline Meehan from HBS Connects, who is a great partner to us in this. Another Ashley Wheeler, and Hensley Carrara. So from HBS Marketing and Communications, because they help us a lot with the social media. They've been tweeting things out. Brian Sullivan is our tech guru from HBS's Media Services, and from Baker Library, the people who really make this whole series work, Dina Gerdeman and Mariah Tumbleson Shaw. I can't thank you enough for that. Our next Books at Baker is going to be on November 18th. And interestingly enough, as I said, it is very related to what you were talking about, Ashley, with taking time to reflect. This is Joe Badaracco's new book called Step Back, How to Bring the Art of Reflection into Your Busy Life. So we seem to be on a roll here with books that are looking at time and how we can better manage that time. So I hope you will take the time and join us for the next one. And I see many of you have asked about getting the slides and repeating various pieces in the presentation. We will have a recording available on the Baker Library's Books at Baker site. So you'll be able to go back and go through the recording and pick up some more insights from that. It takes us about a week to get that edited and up. But in the meantime, if you want to look at the Baker Library site for connections to other links in Ashley's work, there's a faculty page that has a whole bunch of resources that you can follow, the working knowledge story, the HBR article, etc. So there's lots of content that we've made available for you. And you know, I think the bottom line is, who doesn't love somebody who knows Dr. Seuss? So I wanted to thank you for spending this time with us, because it really has flown by. Please please join me again in thanking Ashley for sharing her work. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Books at Baker on November 18th, which we know will be here before we know it. So thanks again, Ashley. And thank you to everybody
Thank you, everyone.
joining us. We'll see you again soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.